670 people here with the speakers and with all the exhibitors. That is the biggest data innovation and analytics event in Nordics so far. That's kind of cool, I think. So I'm super excited about this. Hands up, who in here sees themselves as IT people? All right. And who's the business people? More in the business, on the business side. All right. And who is a little bit like me, somewhere in between? You know, not cool enough, or sorry, not smart enough to do the strategy, and not cool enough to do the geeky stuff. So let's kick this off. I work at Vattenfall. My name is Henrik Göthberg, and I work with topics around our digital transformation right now, or even more in detail around our data and analytics transformation. So major things have happened the last couple of years in Vattenfall, starting with really buzzing around analytics the last 2 or 3 years. Projects popping up everywhere, proof of concept popping up everywhere, but not really visible on this C-level. Very much from underneath. Last year was a major shift. I think we saw with our CEO that, ooh, this is getting kind of tricky now. A lot of silos happening right here. A lot of things going on, really cool stuff, but they are not really enterprise. It doesn't become an enterprise insight out of this. It becomes a lot of pockets of small insights. Super good. Really challenging to manage this, it starts to get. So we basically then step up and say, okay, we need to start thinking about this as an enterprise. Where do we want to go with this? Technology-wise, and then in Vattenfall we have a very, what I would call business-centric steering. So we are of course a company where we have assets like nuclear, hydro, wind farms, and then we have trading, trading on NASDAQ in terms of energy trading, how to sell our own productive energy into the market and how to push it into the retail side. And then we have our networks, then we have our customers. So ultimately then, very different domains we're working in. So the discussion we have had last year and this year, or it has started earlier, but it's now coming up to the C level. It's a little bit about, all right, what do we need to do now? What's the difference? We've done IT for years. We have, 1,600 different systems. We have technology, right? So what's different? So what I've done now as an intro to this, and it's a way to put the context a little bit around this that fits with this, why we are here, is to look at what are the core themes we need to master, that we need to be good at, if we want to do data-driven operations, data-driven organizations. And I'm just going to give you the snapshot. But literally, this is the kind of conversation that we used to have on a lower level, but right now, coming into meetings on the executive board level to really try to educate and discuss what the hell does this mean? What is the difference? So I'll highlight a couple of themes that we are working on, because I think they quite nicely fits into what this Innovation Summit is all about. So the core things we're going to talk about, really briefly, is start with the end in mind. How do you find the business case? How do you find the value? You need to start here, especially if you want to go up to the C-levels. You need to understand how to articulate the business and how to go from business to the analytical topic out of it. Talk about that. Next topic, you need to really know your value chain. And it means everybody needs to know this, but on different levels, of course. The C-levels, our boards needs to understand what is it, the type of business we're about to build, or that we are right now in the middle of building, compared to what we had before. Then you need to be able to operate this. So what are the fundamental roles, what are the fundamental capabilities that we should have now, next to our old capabilities even sometimes? So these are the three themes I would like to introduce this conference with. And then I would like to leave the fourth theme as my closing keynote. So how do you get there? You know, how do you think smartly around driving a transformation from what we come from as an example, a more traditional physical value chain setup to a data-driven company on an enterprise level. So I'm very, very humble. We are in the beginnings of this. And we are at that stage where some few people maybe have a kind of point of view and vision around this. And we are really how to activate the whole company around it. That's where we are right now, from the top level to the lower level. All right, so let's dig into this. Start with the end in mind. What do I mean? For us, it goes back to our fundamental steering. You know, what is our targets on top level? It's about ROCE, return on capital employed, EBIT, probably have heard about that, and cash flow. Those are the main fundamental financial metrics that we have. And what is the key challenge now, and maybe the biggest blocker to get started at all, is that we have a challenge to fundamentally translate our big business questions, our business process topics, into data topics. So what is the analytical question that is behind the business question? I'll give you a snapshot what that is all about. If you think about something, a concept called the intelligence pyramid, and if you heard me before, I come back to this as a metaphor, as a way to talk about this. You know, this is what the FBIs are doing, the NSAs are doing. This is what fact-based decision-making is all about. Going from data, combining it to information, from information, creating insights, from insights, making decisions and driving actions. So ultimately then, what we need to be really, really, really good at in the business is to do this in reverse. Go from a business question and start thinking about what is the analytical or data question behind here. So fundamentally, you then need to have super strong domain expertise, or you need to have, you know, new business model expertise, connected with data science type of guys who can help you consult, explore. What is this question you're asking? Forget about that you only have this data, but what is the fundamentals of this question? What does it break down to? What data does it break down to? And how do we answer this kind of question with data? What analytical models will we use? What visualizations will we use? So this fundamental process you need to be really, really good at. And this is where we are at right now in Vattenfall. We say, okay, in the bottom, okay, we start building now. Things are happening. But when we talk to our C-levels, this is where we're focusing right now, to get them to basically say, I'll give you an example. The head of nuclear. Why don't you sit with your biggest question with the geekiest guy in Vattenfall and talk about that and have facilitation around that? So you really connect the data people with the top biggest questions. Not the skunk work, not the small stuff, the real questions. And why? To start seeing and exploring and seeing new things that I haven't seen before. That was valuable, what we got out of this. So what are those questions? I'll give you a hint. In Vattenfall, we have sort of a full value chain. So we have upstream, we call it. That is the asset side of the business. How many here is mostly an asset business or production company, manufacturing company? All right. So these are the topics around, you know, how do I maximize my ROCE, my EBIT, and cash flow around managing my production and my assets? And we basically break it down to the fundamental life cycle of an asset. And typically, if you're a strong manager, you would know your drivers. You would know your leading KPIs that has an impact on your results. So that's a good starting point. Those KPIs are there for a reason, right? So how do you dig into the analytical questions behind them? If you're downstream, there will be a customer life cycle, or there will maybe be a product life cycle here that you could think about. Just giving you a hint. And what you do is you're exploring those fundamental questions, and you're exploring what type of data is helping me find this, and what analytical model will do the trick in between. Right. That was the first theme. You need to be super good at this. So start thinking about who do we need to do this. It's not really the IT guys anymore who can do the techie things. It's not only the analytical guys. You need to have the domain expertise next to analytical expertise. Second theme, know your data value chain. How do I build this value chain? And now let's talk about this a little bit. Very simply put, if you're a bakery, right, you kind of know what is the process to go from rye to bread. If you run renewable production in Vattenfall, you damn know that your process is how you go from, your different, from hydro, wind, water, wind, or sun to electricity. Otherwise, you're out of business. So we need to be able to have the same fundamental understanding. What is the value chain that is happening with our data? This is what I'm talking about. I just came back from a Gartner conference, the Data Analytics Summit in London, fantastic. They are coining this terminology, information as a second language. So this is research that will come out this year. So think about it like this. You need to be able to have a business conversation around data. And what you know as your second language around data, you need to be conversational if you're on the C-level suit, and you need to be sort of expert level if you're a geek. So what I'm trying to say is that if we don't know data at all, if we don't have that fundamental understanding for what is happening to our data, how does this value chain work, there's no way in hell we can set up a good operational process around it, or having the ability to hire the right competences. So data illiteracy is one way of looking at this, that people in the business side simply has not been close enough to the technology and the data topic. So if you have this problem, you need to think about, how do I make my C-levels more data literate? How do I make my middle management more data literate? If they don't have it, they're not going to ask for it. The demand will not come. So let me do a crash course, the 2-minute version that I simply gave to my, that I talk to people who doesn't sort of know data. Go back to this fundamental story again, because it's simple to understand, right? We have already seen it. Then I do another thing now. Then I try to translate that into data speak. Yeah, information as a second language. So how do you talk about this in data? Well, then you talk about your data sources, and you talk about data ingestion. Then you talk about how you ensemble and transform data. Then you talk about analytics translated into business logic, and you build business rule engines. You build logic that you say help you make decisions, that fundamentally on the top goes into that you start automating some of your business rules into automation and decisions you're making. Not sure how much sense this makes to all of you guys, but to get people to start understanding this value chain is critical, because it tells you something about the technology, the infrastructure you need, and it tells you something about what are we fundamentally doing here. If I talk a little bit analytics around this, we have the typical wordings of descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, algorithmic business. So descriptive, combining data. That is the information part. We have combined in it. Then we start making predictions. Where we basically say, oh, I can predict different things. But that's like going to the doctor and predict you have cancer. You kind of want the prescription afterwards, don't you? And then if you take it all the way, how do I automate that prescription? And that's funny, because if you start looking at that, all these hyped words right now, that is sort of a lot of times talked about in different silos, and going to the IT people, tech people to talk about IoT or whatever, is fundamentally the technology that is used in this value chain. So, and another way of looking at that, if most of our IT we do today, most of our systems today is really on the descriptive level. We take different type of data, we make a workflow, we might combine it. Ultimately, we're on a level of plus and minus, maybe times sometimes and division sometimes. But that's the fundamental level of what is concretely happening in the database. When I talk algorithmic business, of course, we talk mathematics, we talk statistical formulations and stuff like that. So ultimately, from this way of looking at this, when did you do plus and minus in school? Fifth grader, have you seen that show? Are you smarter than a fifth grader? Ooh, this is tricky stuff. We want our systems to go from plus and minus to statistics and math, right? So it means Google, as a company, has done technical physique and have a PhD, and the rest of us, we are fifth graders. That's one way of looking at what it means to fundamentally go to a data-driven business. Now, why is this not happening? In Gartner, they talked about the fundamental concept about scarcity and abundance. In the beginning, it's very scarce. The expertise is very tricky. It's very few guys who can do it. It doesn't take off. Then it gets to an abundance stage. It works for all. It's simpler to realize. Then it takes off. A very good example is the internet. Now, how many knows about DARPA? The origin of the internet, right? Internet was around 20, 30 years before it became mainstream. So what happened? Technology became simpler, user-friendly. The coding was hidden from the normal people, so the citizens of the world could use it. The same will be here. So a lot of the technology's trend right now is basically to simplify in order to make things happen for a citizen. So technology will catch up in really hiding some of this, so as long as you know what you're doing, things will happen underneath. So, and then we talk a little bit about what do you do with this? If you have a data value chain, what is it that technically will happen with this value chain? How will you make money? And then the first topic is like, well, you will use this topic. This data value chain is fundamental for your decision making. How to improve on that? CPM, corporate performance management, plan to perform, BI, the traditional reporting, visualizations, and of course moving into exploratory analytics. Exploring, but more or less supporting decision making, right? Then we move into algorithmic business. What is happening? So I'm stretching you guys here. Where is this going? It goes in a couple of fundamental different topics depending on where you are in the company. So if you have a big physical value chain to manage as a production, as an asset company, it's about building your digital twin. Or in academia, we talk about CyberPhysical Systems. So basically, being able to look at your asset from a digital and data perspective as a way to infuse other types of data, to create a context around that data. And ultimately then when we go into automation, to get that back into how we steer our plants. Why is this happening like that? Well, the challenge is as long as you only have sensor data on the asset, you are restricted to what type of analytics you can do based on vibrations and stuff like that. But I want to talk about ROCE optimized maintenance. I want to go to the wind farm and I want to talk about market optimized maintenance. So when should we stop our windmills? Well, we kind of want to stop them when the market prices for wind renewable energy is low. And we want them to really fly hard when this price goes up. And by the way, the stock, you know how the energy trading goes. So now we're talking about context. Completely other types of data sets that we want to infuse with our IoT data. SCADA data in our term. All right, and then you have the fundamental topic where you're replacing a physical or manual value chain. This is what is happening in the finance part a lot. Outsourcing was in the 90s, now it's robotics. Let the bots loose. Have you heard that expression? Let the bots loose. So you find algorithms, you find business rule engines, and you place them, so you basically go, you're trying to automate your whole flow. So financial closing, all this matching and what you're doing with all the different accounts, you don't want people to do that all matching yourself. You want them to look at the outliers, right? So 90% of all the stuff you do will be automated. Marketing automation, we talk about next best action. Based on all the data we know, what is the next best action that I want to drive to this? Amazon done it for years in terms of giving you recommendations, stuff like this. And then we have the fundamental, this holy grail, the disruptive part. Bottom line, we are creating a new value chain. And all these examples that are sort of sold out there is fundamentally a data value chain. Uber, Airbnb, they have no assets, but they fundamentally take different types of data, put it into a value chain where they provide a service, and ultimately what makes them really disruptive is that their value chain becomes the platform. So in a nutshell, you can go home and talk tomorrow with your C-levels, whatever, you know, what are the things that are driving in this direction? What are we doing to automate? What are we doing to improve information, decision-making? What are we doing to replace manual labor? This is kind of the bottom line stuff, not rocket science at all. So how does this look like? You know, I could have shown you a nuclear power plant, or not you, because you know it, but to my C-suites, I could have put up a picture of the blueprint of a nuclear power plant. It's really tricky now, because all this stuff we hear about is these different technologies. But if I do this, bottom line, we're looking at the reference technology architecture to do the different things and the steps that you need to do in the data value chain. That's all. And it's fundamentally new technologies because we are dealing with much more data. We're simplifying the way we manage data so we can make it simpler for the business to do it, the visualizations. But fundamentally, it's technology around that value chain. But now we're at the Data Innovation Summit. So if this picture is the picture for the CIO. He needs to figure out what technologies do I need to have. If I look at the same storyline, but I look at it from a data perspective, I have the picture for the Chief Digital Officer. Fundamentally thinking about this from a different angle. What is happening with the data value chain? So imagine the infrastructure is the factory, but you in the business will build the assembly lines in here. So you need to have the business domain knowledge and understand what is the business process or the data process around my business. And in Vattenfall, we talk about this then as, you know, what about managing our information as a strategic asset? That really works, by the way, because we really care about managing physical assets. So if I can get into the heads of my CEOs that you need to manage the data asset with equal importance as your physical asset. So the amount of time you are spending in the C-level talking about our nuclear power plants, you talk about your data assets. And by the way, can we measure this? How do I put this in my books? I think we have a great speech around this today even. So this is really important because it kind of means that when we want to do this stuff, do we want to do it in projects and silos and we create the worst spaghetti? You know, or do we see a way how the stuff we do can be packaged, become an asset that we can reuse? So we have data assets that we sort of, okay, ultimately marketing, the product guys, the sales guys, they kind of want the same customer data, but for different versions. But right now, we go out and do this sort of integration down on field level and we build spaghetti because we have an application-driven view of data. Right? Now we're taking platform thinking, putting data in the center, and this is huge. And even for the IT guys to talk about this, what does that mean? We have application SLAs. You know, I have now 300 reports on Power BI. Do I have 300 applications and SLAs then? Or do I have one? And actually, the application SLA is not so good anymore because I need to have a data flow SLA. So shit, it's really killing me because I have the ERP guys over here with their SLA, I have the warehouse guys over here with their SLA, and I have the front-end guys over here with their SLA. They all run their service, they think it's happy, but the business user is miserable because the data flow was killed somewhere. But you know, the infrastructure is running. You know, we're happy in IT. Very different mindset here that you need to start understanding. So learn the data value chain. Last core theme. Last core theme. How do we operate this? That becomes the new storyline. And now, I'm not going to go into detail here, but in Vattenfall, we start trying to think about this in a fundamentally some different areas that we think we need to think about how we do this. And we are right in the beginning. I'm super, super humble. But it becomes a technology story. You know, what's the infrastructure? Where are we going with this? How do we set the standards so we don't completely fragment ourselves? We can do different content, we can do different things, and it's not going to be one technology, it's going to be many technologies. That's why it's so important that we still have a technology roadmap on this. This is kind of the CIO headache in some ways. And then we have the whole operational stuff. You know, so I'm saying that we will have a data process replacing or sitting next to your physical process. So it means that this is core processes in the business, the process of the data scientist, data and analytics asset management. And then used to make it work. To make it work, I think I use. We need to have IT and business working together, because this value chain, it starts with the data engineer kind of work in the bottom. It moves up to information stewardship, asset management. It moves to the data scientist getting the work done. And by the way, the domain knowledge needs to be there the whole way. It's not flipping in a requirement and then go home. It's part of the journey, part of the exploration. So we say in Vattenfall, the way to get this going and what is starting with this digging out the use case. The way to drive this is not the big bang, but using the use case in the middle, being really good at this analytics translation to get our going with a very, very, very strong business focus. And then we will have the change part, how do we become more innovative? What does innovation mean? Should everybody do innovation? Do we have the right data-driven culture in terms of we have silo data, now we want to have enterprise data? Are you that transparent in your companies? And then, of course, you have to have the right talent. All right. Now, to wrap it up, this Data Innovation Summit, I think, is a fantastic setup, because actually, by coincidence, when we started to talk about that, I could simply overlay what we're doing here today and what we're trying to learn about and get inspiration about and get our own points of view about. Educate to empower, yeah? So we have a data innovation stage which will be very much focused on seeing the reuse cases, seeing what people have done, getting inspired about what can we do, all right? The analytics and data science stage is very much centered around the data science role, better understanding what data science work is all about. And then you go into the data management stage, and you will see more of the data engineer stuff. What is the data engineer doing here? And what is the technology they are using? And in the expos, we can see the technologies. So I think it's a fantastic conference we have right now.